The autumn breeze rustled through the trees as a young woman walked into Sunshine Market, her mind filled with thoughts of the week ahead. As an elementary school teacher, she always looked forward to Sundays, her day to prep meals and grade papers before another busy week of shaping young minds. The fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead as she grabbed a shopping cart, its wheels squeaking slightly against the polished floor. She pulled out her phone, double-checking the grocery list she'd carefully prepared that morning. Her two kids had special requests for their lunchboxes this week, and she smiled thinking about their excited faces when they'd see their favorites packed neatly inside. "Good afternoon," called out Mr. Chen, the friendly store owner who'd known her for years. He was restocking the fresh produce section, carefully arranging bright red apples in neat rows. "Beautiful day for shopping, isn't it?" "It sure is," she replied warmly, selecting some crisp lettuce and fresh tomatoes for the week's salads. The produce section was her favorite part of the store. She loved teaching her kids about healthy eating, turning it into a game of colors and shapes. As she moved through the aisles, her cart gradually filled with everyday items: whole grain bread, milk, cheese, and those special fruit snacks her kids loved so much. She couldn't help but notice the prices had gone up again, mentally adjusting her budget as she shopped. Being a single mom meant every penny counted, but she'd learned to be resourceful over the years. The store wasn't very crowded that afternoon, just a few other shoppers going about their business. An elderly couple debated over which type of cereal to buy, while a teenager with headphones bobbed his head to music as he stocked shelves. It was just another ordinary Sunday, or at least it should have been. She took her time in the household supply section, comparing prices on cleaning products. A young store employee offered to help her reach some paper towels from the top shelf, and they chatted briefly about the upcoming fall festival at the local park. These little moments of community connection always made her Sunday shopping trip special. At the checkout counter, she carefully arranged her items on the conveyor belt, making sure nothing would get crushed. The cashier, a high school student working part-time, rang up each item with careful precision. They made small talk about the weather and the upcoming school week, normal, everyday conversation that would soon feel like a distant memory. "That'll be $127.84, the cashier announced. She pulled out her debit card, thankful that her teaching job had provided this month's grocery budget. The receipt printed with a familiar wire, and she carefully tucked it into her purse, a habit her mother had taught her years ago. As she pushed her cart toward the exit, she couldn't help but feel satisfied with her productive afternoon. Her reusable shopping bags were filled with everything she needed for the week ahead. The automatic doors slid open with a gentle whoosh, and the afternoon sun warmed her face as she stepped into the parking lot. She had no way of knowing that these ordinary moments, the friendly conversations, the careful shopping, the routine payment, would soon become crucial pieces of evidence. That this simple Sunday afternoon would transform into something that would shake her community and spark a movement for change. Little did she know that her next few steps across that sun-baked parking lot would change not just her life, but the lives of countless others. As she walked toward her car, the weight of her shopping bags felt normal in her hands. But the weight of what was about to happen would be far heavier and would leave an indelible mark on everyone involved. The warm afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parking lot as she walked toward her car, grocery bags rustling with each step. A gentle breeze carried the scent of fresh-cut grass from the nearby park, where children's laughter echoed in the distance. Everything felt perfectly normal until she heard rapid footsteps approaching from behind. "Stop right there." The sharp command cut through the peaceful afternoon air. She turned around, startled, to find a uniformed officer striding toward her with purpose. His hand was already resting on his belt, his face set in a stern expression that made her heart skip a beat. "Is something wrong, officer?" she asked, carefully setting her grocery bags down on the sun-warmed asphalt. Years of teaching had taught her to keep her voice calm and steady, even when her heart was racing. She noticed other shoppers slowing down to watch, some pulling out their phones. "I need to see your receipts and look through those bags," the officer demanded, his tone leaving no room for discussion. The badge on his chest caught the sunlight as he stepped closer. She could feel curious eyes watching from all directions, fellow shoppers, store employees, and passers-by, all drawn to the unfolding scene. "Of course," she replied, reaching into her purse with deliberate slowness. She'd always taught her students about the importance of staying calm in difficult situations, and now she was putting those lessons into practice. Her fingers found the receipt, still crisp from the printer, and she held it out. The officer snatched the paper from her hand, scanning it with narrowed eyes. "Open the bags," he ordered, despite the receipt clearly showing her purchases. She complied, carefully opening each reusable shopping bag while explaining the contents. "These are just groceries for my kids' lunches," she explained, her teacher's patience showing through. "You can see everything matches the receipt." She pointed to each item as she spoke, her hands steady despite her growing unease. A small crowd had gathered at a safe distance, their presence both comforting and concerning. Through the store's large front windows, she could see Mr. Chen watching intently, his phone in hand. The teenage stockboy had stopped his work, cart of inventory forgotten as he witnessed the scene. "I'm going to need you to step back," the officer said, his voice growing more aggressive. She took a small step backward, her shoes crunching against the rough pavement. The afternoon sun felt suddenly too bright, too harsh, as tension filled the air. "I don't understand," she said quietly, maintaining her composure. "I have my receipt right there. Everything was properly paid for." She gestured toward the store's entrance. "The security cameras can confirm everything. You can ask any of the staff inside." More officers were arriving now, their patrol cars pulling into the parking lot with a quiet urgency. The crowd of onlookers had grown larger, their phones raised like silent witnesses. She could hear whispered conversations, could feel the mixture of concern and outrage building in the gathered crowd. "Last warning," the officer stated, his hand moving to his utility belt. The tension in the air was almost visible now, like heat waves rising from the hot pavement. She stood her ground, dignity intact, hands visible at her sides. Time seemed to slow down as she realized this moment would change everything. The ordinary Sunday afternoon had transformed into something else entirely, a test of character, a moment of truth, a catalyst for change. The security cameras watched silently from above, recording every second. Phones captured every word, every movement. What happened next would send ripples through the community, sparking conversations that needed to happen and changes that needed to be made. In those tense moments, standing in that sun-baked parking lot surrounded by spilled groceries and watching eyes, she remained the same person she'd always been. A teacher, a mother, a member of her community. But circumstances were about to transform her into something more, a symbol, a catalyst, a voice for change. The bright afternoon sun beat down on the parking lot as tension filled the air. In a matter of seconds, everything changed. The officer's hand moved swiftly, and before anyone could react, a cloud of pepper spray filled the air. The burning sensation hit instantly, causing searing pain that brought her to her knees. Through the burning fog, she could hear gasps from the crowd. Her carefully packed groceries scattered across the pavement, apples rolling away, the bread crushed beneath her as she fell. The pain was overwhelming, but even more painful was the humiliation of being treated this way in front of her own community. "I can't see," she called out, her voice steady despite the chaos. Her eyes burned fiercely, tears streaming down her face. She could hear the rustling of movement around her, the murmurs of the crowd growing louder, more urgent. "Everyone stand back." Another officer's voice cut through the commotion. But the crowd wasn't dispersing. Instead, more people were gathering, their phones raised high, capturing every moment of this injustice. The teenage store clerk who had just rung up her groceries rushed out with a bottle of water and some paper towels. "This isn't right," someone shouted from the crowd. Others joined in, their voices rising in unified concern. She could hear Mr. Chen's voice nearby, explaining to someone that she was a regular customer, a respected teacher in the community. Through her pain, she felt a surge of gratitude for these neighbors standing up for her. A young medical student from the crowd stepped forward, identifying herself to the officers. "I can help her," she said firmly. "She needs immediate attention for the pepper spray." The authority in her voice seemed to cut through the tension, and the officers stepped back slightly. The medical student knelt beside her, speaking in calm, professional tones. "Try to keep your eyes closed. Don't rub them, it'll only make it worse. I'm going to help you rinse them out." The cool water brought slight relief, but the burning continued. More patrol cars arrived, their lights flashing silently in the afternoon sun. The crowd had swollen to fill the parking lot, their phones documenting every moment. Some were live streaming, ensuring that what happened here wouldn't be ignored or forgotten. Through the pain and chaos, she maintained her dignity. Even as her eyes burned and her face stung, she remembered her role as an educator, as someone who taught children about right and wrong. She knew that how she handled this moment would teach its own lesson. "I want to file a complaint," she said clearly, her voice carrying across the now quiet parking lot. "And I want everyone who witnessed this to stay, if they can." Her words were measured, deliberate. Even in this moment of trauma, she was thinking about justice, about making sure this incident wouldn't be brushed aside. A community leader who happened to be shopping stepped forward, introducing himself to the supervising officer who had just arrived. "This woman is a pillar of our community," he stated firmly. "She's taught half the children in this neighborhood. What happened here today needs to be addressed." The sun continued its path across the sky, casting longer shadows across the scattered groceries, the gathered crowd, the patrol cars with their silent flashing lights. What had started as a simple shopping trip had transformed into a moment that would spark change throughout the community. As paramedics arrived to properly treat her eyes, she could hear people exchanging contact information, organizing themselves, preparing to take action. This wasn't just about her anymore. It had become about something bigger, about standing up against injustice, about a community coming together to say enough. The videos taken by witnesses were already spreading across social media, carrying the truth of what happened beyond the confines of this parking lot. The community's response, swift, unified, and powerful, showed that they wouldn't stand by silently when one of their own was treated unjustly. The videos spread like wildfire across social media platforms. By sunset, what had happened in that sunny parking lot was being seen by thousands, then hundreds of thousands of people. The raw footage, captured from multiple angles by concerned citizens, told a story that couldn't be ignored. In the local community center, people gathered spontaneously that evening. The room buzzed with energy as neighbors, teachers, parents, and students filled every available seat. The young medical student who had helped at the scene was there, along with Mr. Chen from the store and dozens of other witnesses. "I've known her for 5 years," one parent stood up to speak. "She taught both my kids. She stays late every day to help students who need extra support." This is who they chose to attack. The emotion in his voice resonated through the packed room. Social media comments poured in from across the country. The hashtag started trending, carrying messages of support and calls for justice. Local news vans parked outside the store, their reporters interviewing witnesses who stepped forward to share what they'd seen. The teachers, students, and their parents organized a peaceful gathering outside the school the next morning. They held handmade signs with messages of support that young voices joined together in solidarity. "Best teacher ever," read one sign, decorated with careful crayon drawings. "We stand with you," declared another. Community leaders called an emergency meeting with city officials. The room was tense as they reviewed the footage, discussed policy changes, and demanded accountability. The police chief faced tough questions about training procedures and racial bias. Local businesses stepped up too. The grocery store released their security camera footage, which clearly showed her making her purchases normally. Other shop owners shared their stories of her regular visits, painting a picture of a respected community member who had been unjustly targeted. A local law firm offered to take her case pro bono. "This isn't just about one incident," the lead attorney explained to the gathered press. "This is about making sure our community feels safe shopping, walking, just living their daily lives without fear." The story caught the attention of national civil rights organizations. They sent representatives to meet with community members, offering support and resources. This local incident was becoming part of a larger conversation about necessary changes in law enforcement practices. Teachers from across the district wore blue ribbons to school in solidarity. Her students made cards and wrote letters of support. "You taught us to stand up for what's right," one student wrote. "Now we're standing up for you." Social media influencers and celebrities began sharing the story, amplifying the call for justice. But it was the local response that meant the most, the neighbors bringing groceries to replace what had been scattered in the parking lot, the parents organizing meal trains, the students creating a wall of supportive messages at school. The local newspaper ran a front-page story featuring interviews with her former students, now grown, sharing how she had impacted their lives. One had become a teacher himself, inspired by her example. Another was studying law, determined to fight for justice in his community. As the week progressed, the movement grew stronger. What started as a shocking incident in a parking lot had transformed into a catalyst for change. The community didn't just demand justice. They stood together, supporting one of their own, showing what real community solidarity looks like. Every news update, every social media post, every community meeting added to the momentum. This wasn't a story that would fade away after a few days. The community was determined to see real change come from this incident to ensure that no one else would face the same treatment. The police department's Internal Affairs Division took over the investigation as public pressure mounted. They gathered in a dimly lit room, reviewing footage from multiple angles, store security cameras, bystander videos, and the officer's own body camera. Each frame told the same story, leaving no room for misinterpretation. The store's security team provided crystal clear footage showing the teacher's entire shopping trip. The timestamps matched perfectly with her receipt: 2:15 p.m. at the produce section, 2:45 p.m. at checkout, 2:47 p.m. leaving the store. Every item in her bags corresponded to a purchase on her receipt. "Look at this," one investigator said, pointing to the body camera footage. The timestamp showed the officer had received no complaint, no call for service at the store. He had acted entirely on his own initiative. The footage revealed something else too, a pattern of similar stops in his recent past. The department's records unit pulled the officer's file. Previous complaints emerged, most swept under the rug or dismissed without proper investigation. A troubling picture began to form of an officer who repeatedly overstepped his authority, particularly with minority shoppers. The store manager provided additional evidence, years of receipts showing the teacher as a regular customer, always paying for her items, often chatting with staff about her students and their achievements. "She's been shopping here every Sunday for years," he testified, "never once had an issue." Internal Affairs investigators interviewed store employees one by one. The young cashier recalled the normal transaction, the friendly conversation about the upcoming school week. The stock boy described how the officer had ignored his attempts to verify her regular customer status. The medical student who helped at the scene provided her own statement, detailing the unnecessary use of force she witnessed. Her medical training allowed her to document the effects of the pepper spray, the proper procedures that should have been followed and weren't. Technology experts analyzed the officer's work computer, finding concerning search patterns and communications that suggested potential bias. His dashboard camera footage from previous weeks revealed similar unnecessary stops, building a timeline of troubling behavior. As investigators dug deeper, they discovered the officer had been transferred from another district following similar incidents. The pattern stretched back further than initially suspected, raising serious questions about the department's hiring and supervision practices. The district attorney's office joined the investigation, bringing their own team of experts. They conducted new interviews, gathered additional evidence, and began building a case that went beyond this single incident to address systemic issues within the department. Community oversight committees demanded access to training records. They found gaps in required bias training, outdated procedures, and a lack of accountability measures. The investigation was revealing not just one officer's actions, but an entire system in need of reform. The teacher's students' parents provided statements about her character, her dedication to the community. Fellow teachers spoke about her mentorship of young educators, her after-school programs, her commitment to every child's success. These testimonies painted a picture of someone who had devoted her life to building up the very community where she faced such injustice. Local civil rights organizations contributed their own research, connecting this incident to a larger pattern of similar events across the country. Their data helped provide context and perspective, showing how this local incident reflected broader systemic issues. As the investigation progressed, it became clear this wasn't just about one afternoon in a parking lot. It was about patterns of behavior, about systems that needed changing, about a community demanding better from those sworn to protect them. The evidence was mounting, pointing toward changes that couldn't be ignored. The courthouse steps were crowded with supporters as the legal proceedings began. The morning sun glinted off the building's stone facade as the teacher walked up those steps, head held high, surrounded by her legal team. She had chosen to wear the same blue dress she often wore to parent-teacher conferences, a reminder of who she was and what she stood for. Inside the courtroom, the evidence was overwhelming. Security footage played on screens, showing every angle of that fateful afternoon. The store's cameras had captured the entire sequence: her normal shopping trip, the proper payment, the unnecessary confrontation. The officer's body camera footage told an even more damaging story. The timestamps don't lie, her attorney explained to the packed courtroom. At 2:45 p.m., my client paid for her groceries. At 2:47 p.m., she walked out with her receipt. At 2:48 p.m., without any complaint or cause, she was confronted and assaulted. The evidence timeline was projected onto a large screen, each moment documented with precision. The young medical student testified about the effects of the pepper spray, her professional assessment carrying weight with the jury. The use of force was completely unnecessary, she stated firmly. I witnessed a calm, compliant citizen being attacked without provocation. Store employees took the stand one by one. The cashier described the normal transaction, the friendly conversation about the upcoming school week. Mr. Chen spoke about years of regular Sunday visits, always peaceful, always proper. The teenage stockboy recounted how his attempts to verify her regular customer status were ignored. The district attorney's office presented their findings about the officer's history. Previous incidents emerged, showing a pattern of similar confrontations. Training records revealed missed sessions, ignored warnings, and a history of complaints that had been brushed aside. Community members filled the courtroom each day, their presence a silent testimony to her impact on their lives. Parents of her students sat shoulder to shoulder with local business owners, religious leaders, and civil rights activists. They watched as justice slowly but surely unfolded. The police chief was called to testify about department policies and training procedures. Under questioning, gaps in oversight became apparent. The need for systemic change was becoming clearer with each passing day in court. Expert witnesses discussed proper police procedures, explaining in detail how the situation should have been handled. Their testimony highlighted the complete failure to follow standard protocols, the unnecessary escalation, the abuse of power that had occurred in that parking lot. The officer's own testimony proved damaging to his case. His attempts to justify his actions fell apart under cross-examination. The body camera footage contradicted his claims, showing clearly that he had acted without cause, without warning, without justification. Civil rights attorneys presented broader context, connecting this incident to similar cases across the country. They explained how this case could set important precedents for police accountability and community protection. As the proceedings continued, media coverage grew. National news outlets picked up the story, recognizing its significance in the ongoing conversation about police reform. Each day brought new revelations, new testimony, new evidence of the changes needed in law enforcement. The teacher sat through it all with quiet dignity, supported by her community. During breaks, she could be seen encouraging her students who came to watch, turning even this difficult experience into a teaching moment about justice and standing up for what's right. The legal proceedings weren't just about seeking compensation for one incident. They were about establishing accountability, about making sure no other member of the community would face similar treatment. Each day in court brought them closer to that goal. The changes started rolling out just weeks after the court's final decision. The police department announced a complete overhaul of their training programs, with new emphasis on community relations and bias prevention. But the real transformation was happening at a deeper level, touching every corner of the community. In the teacher's classroom, things looked different too. Her students watched as she turned her experience into powerful lessons about standing up for what's right. Sometimes hard things happen, she told them, but it's what we do afterward that really matters. The settlement money could have been her ticket to a quieter life, maybe even early retirement. Instead, she had bigger plans. Meeting with community leaders in the same neighborhood center where people had first gathered to support her, she laid out her vision for a foundation. "We're calling it the Community Bridge Foundation," she announced to the packed room. "Because that's what we need. Bridges between law enforcement and the community, between different neighborhoods, between people who might not understand each other yet." The foundation's first project launched at her school. Police officers came in as guest readers, sitting cross-legged on colorful classroom rugs, sharing stories with wide-eyed students. But before any officer could participate, they had to complete the foundation's new training program, designed by community members and law enforcement experts working together. Local businesses joined the effort. The grocery store where it all started became a meeting place for community dialogue sessions. Every Sunday afternoon, people gathered in the store's break room to talk openly about their experiences, their fears, and their hopes for the future. The officer who had confronted her that day was no longer on the force, but the story didn't end there. His case became a teaching tool in police academies across the state, an example of how quickly things can go wrong and why change was necessary. The young medical student who had helped her that day became a regular speaker at police training sessions, teaching officers about the physical and emotional impact of their actions. Her medical perspective helped bridge the gap between procedure and human experience. Other communities started reaching out, wanting to learn from their experience. The teacher found herself traveling on weekends, sharing her story, and helping other towns set up similar programs. Her students would beam with pride when they saw their teacher on the news, knowing they were part of something bigger. The foundation grew, offering scholarships to students interested in law enforcement or community service. "We're not just trying to prevent problems," she explained to a reporter. "We're trying to build a new generation of leaders who understand both sides of the story." A year after the incident, the parking lot where it all happened looked different. The store had installed a community bulletin board near the entrance, covered with flyers for foundation events, community meetings, and success stories. People would often stop to read them, adding their own notes of support and hope. The change wasn't just in new policies or programs, it was in the way people treated each other. When police cars drove through the neighborhood now, officers would often wave to kids wearing the foundation's bright blue t-shirts. Community members felt more comfortable approaching officers with concerns or questions. In her classroom, the teacher kept a small display of letters and drawings from students past and present. "My teacher stood up for what's right," one letter read, "and taught us we can too." These simple words captured the heart of everything that had changed. The foundation's work continued to grow, spreading from one community to another. What had started as a moment of injustice had transformed into a movement of hope, proof that positive change was possible when people came together with open hearts and determined minds.